Thank you for being with us today for this fourth appointment with the Art for the Environment conversations. My name is Camila Palestra. I'm a curator. I work at the Center for Sustainable Fashion at UAL, where I've been developing with Professor Lucy Orta the International Residency Programme Art for the Environment. The program was launched in 2015 as a way to offer our students and recent graduates the incredible opportunity to apply to a fully funded residency to explore concerns that define the 21st century, from biodiversity, environmental sustainability, social economy, and human rights. We have an incredible networks of partners across the globe, from Brazil to India, from Senegal to Canada, and across Europe and the UK. So in this moment in which physical residencies are suspended because of the COVID-19 restrictions, I thought it would be a good opportunity to rejoin with our partners and residents to come together and to reflect on their experiences and on their creative role in envisioning a world of tomorrow. So I'm very pleased to have here today with us Matthias Persson, the Artist Residencies Director and French Office Director at the Josef and Anni Albers Foundation, artist Anni Akussah, and designer Joao Maraschin, which I hope meanwhile were able to join us. Matthias is, as I said, the Artist Residencies Director, including Fred in Senegal, and the French Office Director at the Josef and Anni Albers Foundation. As an artist in his own right, he has won several awards and residencies, and is also a curator and highly experienced arts project manager. Anni Akussah is a contemporary multidisciplinary artist who works with painting, sculpture, and film. Born in Ghana and based in London, Anni explores through her work issues of identity, belonging, and authenticity of identification documents regarding African immigration. Her work was included in the Bloomberg New Contemporaries in 2018. Anni has a BA Fine Arts from Wimbledon College of Arts at UAL. And Joao Maraschin is a London-based Brazilian designer who launched his eponymous brand following graduation from his master's degree at the London College of Fashion. His debut collection was called Foreigner Traveller and enhanced the power of fashion by tackling concerns around sustainability in several agendas. Through many collaborations, the brand aims to preserve traditional handmade techniques as much as stands for equality of rights and fair share. The collections are based in creative narratives informed by art, critical theory, craftsmanship, and innovation processes.
Thank you. Thank you, Camilla. It's great to be here today. Thank you so much for the invitation. We are actually really happy that we have this sort of collaborations and partnerships as we have with you. So it's really been a great pleasure to collaborate with you on the Art for the Environment program and University of Arts London. That's really the kind of projects that actually nourishes our program, and the program is really about linkage of different components that together create what TRED really is. So here is a little definition, a little list that I just prepared. So TRED is a cultural center in the village of Sintian, a rural village for Tambacounda in the southeastern region of Senegal. TRED is a water source for the village and for the artists and their guests. TRED is also the base for Le Corse's agricultural program. So Le Corse is the NGO that the Albers Foundation collaborates with for TRED. So the Women's Collaborative of Sintian operates a garden and fruit tree nursery on the site, and it's frequently used for meetings and workshops. And TRED is also a residency program, as you know, and a cultural center that allows local and international artists to live and work in Sintian. TRED is also an award-winning building by Tsushi Gomori, built in 2015, and much more. So yeah, basically, as I said, TRED is a lot of things, but actually I think one quote from actually Nick Murphy that started this program together with my colleagues back in the days, sort of explains it quite well when he wrote on the webpage, TRED posits that art, culture and architecture should be supported in tandem with agriculture, education and health, and that all of these sectors support one another. As such, we are mobilizing the same tenets of inclusion and intersection that made the Bauhaus such a creative success. This is a project about connection and linkage between two distant points, persons, places, or perspectives, to be like TRED by forming connections that run through us and not around us. So that is really capturing quite well what TRED is. But as such, sort of a little bit more concretely, you could say that TRED is the culmination of the efforts by the founder of TRED, Nicholas Fox-Weber. So many of you may know him already. He's been directing the Josef and Anni Albers Foundation since over 40 years. And he also founded Akussah, the NGO that I mentioned earlier. So Akussah was founded in 2005 and works really to empower individuals in the same region, Tambacounda region, to increase access to medical care, economical opportunity and education, as well as culture and arts. So TRED is really that sort of culmination of shared efforts of the Albers Foundation and Akussah. So I just want to tell you that you can of course ask any questions, and you can also find much more information about TRED on the website, on TRED's website, as well as on Akussah's website and on the Albers Foundation's website. We're currently closed for residents due to the pandemic, and we do not accept applications for the time being, but we have had to reschedule all the residencies that were to take place in 2020 and 2021. So at the moment, TRED is really just, so to speak, just existing as a cultural center in the village of Sintian, and is really also the hub for a number of agricultural programs, as I mentioned before. Yeah, I mean, I think I should just show you a little video that gives, it's like just 1 minute long, but it gives a little bit of an atmosphere of the silence that you can experience there as an artist, because it's a very particular environment, I would say, especially if you come from far away, of course. But Annie Marie can tell more about that, because Annie Marie has already been to TRED in 2019. But basically, it's an interesting mix between having a sense of quiet and sort of, you really feel the pace of time in a whole new way when you arrive there. And at the same time, it's a very social place with a lot of local activity, let's say. So let's see the video, just 1 minute long. Great. Yeah, so there's really so much to say about thread that I think that it's more interesting in a way to hear it from one of the visiting artists, Annie Marie, who has her experience. And I'm also very excited to speak to Joao today, who will be going later. And I think that, you know, to discover more, you could check out the website where you will have much more detailed information and get much more insight into what thread really is. But don't hesitate if you have any questions. And again, I just want to mention that I'm really happy with this sort of collaboration, because this is really what thread is about. It's about connecting and connecting worlds, and this is what we're doing, and that's hopefully what we're doing right now as well, by sharing this with all of you. So thank you.
Thank you, Matthias, for your presentation. Such a wonderful and interesting place. I've been courting thread for quite many years before being able to connect with you and establish the partnership. And we are very pleased that it's a partnership that continues through the years. I'm sure there will be questions at the end, but now I would pass it over to Anni. Thank you.
So, like Camilla has already introduced me and Matthias, I'm Annie. I'm currently living and working in Ghana, doing my MFA at the KNUST, the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, in the Painting and Sculpture Department with the Black Star Alliance community. And today I'm just going to be talking briefly about the kinds of conversations that I'm interested in, the kinds of social material and processes embedded within my practice, but also my time in Senegal. I'll show you briefly the kind of works that I made and the environments and objects and materials that I encountered in Sinchan, where the residency is based. So ordinarily, I'm interested in mark making. I'm interested in painting and sculpture within various contexts. I'm interested in notions of belonging and negotiating in familiar spaces, or negotiating belonging in familiar spaces. And this manifests itself through the identification documents and the notion of authenticity within that I explore. And this conversation or interest started from travel documents, which I found in the National Archives in Accra, which you see in the first slide, the stamps. And where I was looking at deportation documents and visa applications and passports, and there were certain marks and phrases and parts of the documents that I was interested in. So like phrases like British subject, different marks like thumbprints, and just general marks on the form, and even the archival form that this document took. And so I was working directly from these archival material and producing paintings like this that spoke to the conversation. And these paintings would have objects in them coming from the social material or the social fabric of this conversation, or certain specific environments or spaces. So for example, in Quantini over here, I was using the jute and the check stack, which speaks to so many things. It speaks to movements. It speaks not just movements of bodies or entities, but movements of trade, movements of living organisms, a universal activity that everything or a broad or heterogenic group of agents participate in daily. So I would take these stamps and phrases and I would edit them in Photoshop, and I would layer multiple things. So basically I would layer stamps coming from different sites at different times in the work within the stamp or here. And so it would create this heterotopic space within a work of a time, of a place that never really existed in real life, but is able to exist in this space of art. So I carried on making work from the archive and using the travel documents and the marks. But then I also became interested in looking at the social space and the social environment and taking material from that, material in terms of color, material in terms of crude found object that I was interested in. And these will appear in different forms. So this is spaces, and in spaces, it draws on council estates in London. At the time, I lived in Mile End in London, and I had also moved to a studio in South London and it was surrounded by council estates. Like in every part of London that I've lived, I've been surrounded by council estates, or I've lived in council estates myself. So this is the point where I start introducing social material or environmental material in the work, in the materiality of the work actually. And here also, I'm going through very quickly so that everybody can have some time when we talk about, like we have a conversation. So here's another painting, Homegoing, where I'm now drawing on the material on the work once again, where it's coming from in terms of the social, economic, politics, material histories, and with the text and the stamps that I showed in the previous slide, I'm also drawn to the idea of movements and mark making. So in screen printing, there's ink transferred through a surface from one screen onto the surface, and even before before that, there's a transfer of a kind of image through the process of making a screen. And this is something that I also deal with within the work. But I'm able to deal with the conversation through the process and materiality of screen printing itself. This experience is identical in the use of transfers. It's the use of acetone. There is this pigment migrating from A to B. So there's this conversation about how one entity affects, there's this exchange, right? Like the pigment moving from this surface to another. There's this contact happening, like how certain languages are formed, like Pidgin or Creole. There's a contact happening during this migration. So not only is this surface affected by the ink, this new identity, but the paper that I have made this transfer from is also affected by this activity, a loss, a change in character. And this loss is seen in so many, it's seen in our everyday, it's seen in the everyday movement of trade and migration. And like the example with certain languages, and the historical attributes of an object. And so the kind of crude objects in the work are not just crude objects, they are objects that have their own history and politics attached to it before it's even introduced to the space of art. So for example, in this painting, Homegoing, you see that the two rods at the top are from these wooden noodle baskets that are from a British, Japanese kitchen that I used to work in London. And so these objects are coming from a certain space or a certain milieu of economic happenings and economic transactions and economic crisis. So in making, there are other things that I employ within the work. So like I said, mark making is important. And in this work, Young Pioneers, you see the letter Persson and you see the indentation on the left side. So not only am I using the archive or archival object as a starting point to make the work, but I'm using archival processes like digging and excavating and finding familiarity or even losing familiarity to create the body of work that is dealing with mark making. And yeah, so architectural forms really speak to the work, and this was one of the crucial things about and important things about being in Sinchan. You know, the various architectural simple geometric forms that I became interested in. So this is the gate to a nursery school in Sinchan, and I'm just intrigued by the repetition in forms. So there'll be a repetition of line or shapes. There's a disruption, there's an absence, and I'm really interested in that when I look at architectural buildings. And these experiences, the repetition and the familiarity, manifests in other processes of production with the transfers, like I said, the loss of pigments from A to B. So this kind of structures and influences the work. In Senegal, I spent most of my time reading and making sketches. Like the video Matthias showed of how serene and like quiet the place. It's a place of productivity, honestly. And so I spent my time making sketches, and I made a few works, and I spent a huge chunk of my time sketching. This is also another building in Sinchan that I was interested in regards to the form of the building and the colors and the texture of it, and very importantly, the material that was used to make the building. So you see that in later works I'll show you, I'll begin to include a different kind of material in the work. I'll kind of move from the language or the material of painting into a material in our social space, in our social fabric. I think as artists, if you're interested in painting, for example, you don't need to make a work, or you don't need to remain in the language of painting. I think it's important to include materials from our social fabric. That way it may literally or visually build our society. So we must avail ourselves to different languages and different materials, languages from the artist, languages from the trader, languages from a carpenter, because it makes it actually, it makes it like literally makes it fun, and it opens up the conversation, and in doing things that maybe paint may not be able to do. So I'm going to speed up. So this is a train station in Tambacounda in Senegal. So during the residency, you are very free to like walk around and look around the town, and at certain points you get to go into a city and to access like internet and other things, and just to look at the space. So I really borrow from architecture. It's an interesting form to explore. Yeah, this is one of the works I made at Sinchan. It's a really huge installation that I hand stitched together with Cisse, who works at Thread, and so it has a block prints which I made. I stencil stamps for my passports, for my personal passport, and also my dad's passport. So you have this two-generational kind of marker merge in one, and it seems like it all happened at the same time and in the same space. It seems authentic. It seems authoritative, and yeah. So like I spoke to that in regarding the stamps, but more importantly, the krente in this work, which is the brown surface you see, is some sort of woven material akin to bamboo. It's like a rattan, but this krente is used for building in Sinchan. It's used for making borders and partitions in homes and gardens and other areas of the village. So I'm really interested in bringing, or should I say recycling, work or objects from this social space into the art space. And again, you have the transfers and the indigo fabric and the jute sacks. Yeah, this work was made, like I said, during my time at Sinchan, and later and remade for 154 in London. And with this work, Cisse, I have an image. Cisse really helped me out with this work. Cisse is the guy at Thread. I don't know his official role, but Cisse is the guy at Thread that, you know, takes you around town and and he becomes important in the making of the work, because whilst you're having conversations, he informs you, he gives you like this historical context to this krente or this material that I've introduced. So yeah, he also helped me out in running the workshop alongside Sylvia Rossi. Sylvia Rossi is an amazing photographer, an artist that was on the residency with me. So yeah, this is one of the works that I made at Sinchan. I'll just briefly go through. So there are also digital works and drawings that I make that may or may not remain as digital or in the collage. And yeah, so I'm going to wrap up. Yeah, so the archive is really central, or rather, should I say, the processes of archiving, rather, it's a central theme in the work. It's really present in the work. So yeah, like I said, like digging, excavating, finding familiarity, covering, uncovering, and it's about mark making. It's about mark making. So I kind of deduct, and I don't want to say dilute, but bring everything down to its most basic point of mark making, and that's what migration kind of seeks to do also. Yeah, so this is me sitting in the archive in Dakar. These are close-ups of new works that I'm making, and like I was mentioning, that I was kind of bringing certain qualities of mark making and belonging down to the mark itself in the most basic way. These wooden blocks are wooden blocks found in shipping crates and wooden pallets that I kind of casts and make multiples of these blocks. So this is some close-up of some image I'm going to wrap. And like I said, this work, in this work, you have to deal with the process of layering. You have to deal with the process of layering that speaks to histories and speaks to the process of archiving and the process of archaeology. So digging, in this work, digging and sanding off some paints. In the actual making, I would sand some paints and reuse the paints on a new layer or on a new surface of the work. I think I would wrap it off by just saying that in the work, I'm looking at these structures that exist in architectural objects and the environment and importing them to the work. So these lines, for example, find themselves in pervasive spaces, of which the work is also one. And yeah, I'll just go to the last images without saying anything. And systems of organizing, actually. So systems of organizing. Yeah, workshops are key to my practice. I think workshops and teaching are very important emancipatory spaces that allow for exchange. Yeah, and I'll leave it on that note. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm very glad to be here sharing my work with you. I'm Joao Maraschin. I am originally from Brazil, but I'm based in London. I have graduated from the MA in Fashion Design Women's Wear, London College of Fashion last year. And after that, launched my eponymous brand, Joao Maraschin. My work is community-led practice, collaborating with artisans across the world to inspire and drive positive social change. I basically look at the idea of preserving traditional knowledge of craftsmanship by engaging with educational and mentoring programs like the Thread Senegal residency, for example. My practice is human-centered design, and I look at community through collaboration. So the idea of sharing skills and working together with the idea of positive social change. I look at inclusive design, basically working with practitioners in vulnerable or underserved conditions. For example, for instance, one of the communities I work with in central Brazil at the moment, they are all older practitioners, older than 70 years old. Looking at the environmental responsibility, I look at loop systems in the perspective of repurposing waste, recycling and upcycling materials. Overall, the intention to generate positive impact by responsible design. So a bit of the visuals of my work. I would like to see this image with the other one that's next, but I'll get to that. But basically here, I touch upon the idea of environmental responsibility, thinking that more sustainable processes and design thinking are more than just needed in the current scenario and current world, but a sustainable mindset is basically non-negotiable anymore. I think the only way forward is to stay with the trouble and to think, and more importantly, to act sustainably in our professional responsibilities, but also in our personal relationship with the planet and the people that we come across. I think when I look at my practice and think of the documentation process there is behind, I do acknowledge the idea of transparency, traceability, accountability of how, who, when, and what is the impact that I have with my creative ambition. So here you can see, for instance, this image is at the top left, might look like a spaghetti, but it's not. It's basically silk and wool that were recovered from landfill and then dyed with hazelnuts and onions. And then with this community in central Brazil, in the countryside of Brazil, I worked with all of that in a very handmade perspective. And then we created these garments that were shown during London Fashion Week last year. So really sort of like looking at what I just said in the perspective of like what there is behind the process and this images of catwalk and campaign, what really happens in the background. Here again is another part of the process. So you put this guy is putting the leaves of spinach and matcha into a container, and we basically worked out all of the silk to be hand dyed and organically dyed with those two organic natural components. So basically all of the water is after irrigated back to the plantation where the silkworms are grow and are basically kept. So this is the result of that material, and really much looking at the idea of closed loop systems in terms of circularity, where you keep circulating the material around your supply chain rather than just putting it in landfill and having a more sort of vertical sort of perspective. Here I look at a second pillar that is very important to my work and my practice, and also resonates with the residency at Red Senegal, which is social design. So behind those two campaign images, there is loads of artisans, and for instance, this is the community of artists I mentioned in the beginning, of older practitioners. And I think because the work is pretty much handmade, the only way I can actually really do justice to what happens behind the scenes is really showing their hands and the work they do with the machine. I think arts and cultural resources have much to offer to individuals and communities to foster understanding and skills building. One of the intentions with my work as well is to really much inspire younger generations to look at craft and look at handmade techniques, and really help those techniques to be passed down by older practitioners to younger audiences. I think art and cultural projects can really become significant vehicles for building communication skills, widen participation of people and community, and really much build leadership. I think working at the intersection of culture and community, which is something that is really alive in the Thread Senegal arena, can really provide a very holistic approach to collective development, and not only a practice on its own, but really much a shared practice with everybody else that comes across the work. And so here is another sample of one of the pieces that we developed in the communities. This was in the catwalk last year in February 2020. And this is pretty much one of the artisans, her name is Estella, working in the workshop and making and manufacturing that piece that took more than 25 days for that very only jumpsuit. To wrap up and to really touch base on the final pillar of my work, I really believe in community through collaboration. I think art projects, and with effect, my practice as a designer working with craftsmanship, can really provide an entry point for exchange with and between different groups and individuals like Fred Senegal. I think through collaboration, we have an opportunity to stimulate knowledge share and really work together, and not just in an individual capacity. And I think when we use art and craft as a critical tool in social agendas to tackle social issues or social problems, we are really exploring the boundaries of existing organizational definitions that we sometimes take for granted, and really rediscovering our own cultural practice and cultural resources. Thank you so much. You can reach out to me on my link on Instagram, or even on the website to continue this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Joao. Thank you so much for this fantastic and brief overview of your practice. It's really interesting to see how diverse practices, if we think of Anni-Marie and your own, can fit and benefit from and contribute to the mission at Thread. We already have, so I would open up to our audience participants to ask questions. We already have one question for you, Joao, in fact, about the materials you use. Vicky asked if you use recycled or found or handmade material.
So hi, Vicky. Thank you so much for your question. So yes, as a primary resource for my practice, I try not to go down the traditional route, which would be attending international trade fairs. And I do try to work with recycled or, as you say, found materials, or pretty much create new surfaces with the exchanges I have with the communities, which will always be handmade. On the other hand, I do develop some work with some industry partners and some companies that I basically make fabrics from scratch, but always looking at the idea of monomaterial, so which means something that is 100% something, so 100% cotton, 100% silk, 100% wool. So for that decision, I actually guarantee that the life cycle of that material or the recyclability of that material will be possible, rather than, because I think one of the challenges we face as designers is pretty much the idea that a lot of the pieces of the clothing we wear, they have 3% of elastane, 5% of polyester, and then really to sit through the recyclability of those materials is very challenging and very difficult, and sometimes actually not even possible because we don't have the mechanism to be able to do that. So when I do work with, if you like, virgin material, because of the partnerships I have with some companies, I always go down the route of monomaterial, 100% some sort of composition.
I have a question for Anni-Marie. It's in your report from the residency, and so quite some time ago, you mentioned that visiting the farms where they were planting trees was sort of how did it made you situate yourself in your practice, and I was wondering what it meant and what it means, or if it still has a meaning in your practice today.
It still does. I think maybe I may not speak about it overtly, but it really does. Let's think about the process of planting something, or planting a seedling, or yeah, a little crop. You dig a hole somewhere. You take it from another space, another media, and you uproot it from another media and move it to another space. It's so you make a hole, you dig a hole, you plant it in, you bury it in, and it's supposed to grow new roots, new systems of living in a new space. I really related to myself. I grew up in Ghana. I moved to London when I was 13, and I'm introduced into a new space that I have to navigate and familiarize myself in. And the contradiction is that maybe in this new space that I move into, the question is posed to me, where are you from, right? And it's a question that the answer keeps changing all the time. So because my identity keeps changing, my identity keeps morphing. And I moved back to Ghana to do my master's, and I'm asked the same question again. In the same space that I thought I like maybe was home, or I thought I really did come from. I'm asked the same question again, where are you from? So I think the process of planting is very identical to movement, is very identical to mark making, in the sense that it's referring to the fact that one has to keep reinventing themselves, and that the meaning of home really, really changes. And when movement happens to an entity, it doesn't just change the person, it's not just changing me, it's changing the body politic in which the person is coming from. I'm going to do so much to the space that I'm in, and so much of the space that I'm in is going to do something for me. That's what I was saying, talking about the exchange, the affect, to affect and to be affected by. So yeah, it's not overt in the work, but it's very.
And Francesco Mazzarella is suggesting to get in touch with Flavia Amadeo if you don't know her.
Absolutely, thank you so much, Francesco. And I can also see that he touched on the idea of the sort of model I work with. So one of the things I actually also approach in my practice is ageism, and the intention to work with older practitioners in the perspective of the artisans I work with also resonates when I actually put a campaign together, and if you like, the woman I designed for, which is a more mature audience. I think it's really important when you talk about introducing more inclusivity and diversity into the fashion fabric to really tackle that by image, because fashion is all about the image we produce. And despite accessing and looking more and more into process, a lot of people still see the final image only. So it's really important to be able to communicate that through the campaigns I put together, and really to give space for all the audiences, or mature audiences, to really have a say in the whole arena of fashion, and to be able to dialogue with brands that they can actually really see themselves directly across, rather than actually just be looking at young references and trying to fight ageism and trying to be that younger woman that just doesn't really make sense and doesn't really belong in the current scenario anymore. So that's really much why I've been trying to thrive and survive in this very young kind of driven industry, but really trying to sort of like challenge the status quo, and really bringing a different and more refreshing image to the picture.
Thank you, Joao, and you've got a very you've got a fan.
Thank you, Francesca. Thank you.
Supporting you, and we really look forward to your project that you'll be developing at Thread. I have a question for you, Matthias, while waiting for participants to ask other questions. You mentioned in your presentation the parallel or reference to the Bauhaus. So I was wondering, because of course it's a very different time and very different setting, environment. I was wondering if you can expand a little bit on how you create that, or how it was established. Thread in reference to Bauhaus, what are the joint characteristics of the project?
Is my audio on? Yes. All right. Yeah. Thanks for the question. So it's not created in direct reference to the Bauhaus, but there is definitely a shared sense of the whole coming together, of art not being an isolated thing that only goes in one direction, but a very much a sort of forward thinking and also shared effort. Of course, Thread is also really, I mean, it's also about Anni Albers used to say, basically, you can go anywhere from anywhere, and that is really what Thread is most of all. It's really a place where you can go, and you do not need to have like a prefixed idea of what you want to do. You can. The idea is that you go there and leave behind some of the known, let's say, and in that sense, you sort of reinvent yourself. And I think that's that's really what it is most of all, I would say. And it's of course a place where worlds come together and meet in a very humane manner, and where art is not separate from life. And in that sense, there is a link. At Thread, art is also it's not separate from medical care. It's not separate from agriculture. It's really a place where, you know, some people that live there are on the edge of survival, but have enormous joy in the everyday. And there are such incredible meetings where it goes both ways, with very enriching encounters that arise there. I guess I would actually be curious also to hear from Annie Marie how she experienced it coming as a guest from the outside into an area like that, and maybe that could be interesting also to hear for Joao, who will be going in the future, just a little bit about her experience coming as a guest, because it's a very particular setting. This is a community of people living their everyday lives, and then we constantly have guests coming from the outside, and incredible encounters happen all the time. But of course, a lot of, let's say, open-mindedness and understanding and humility has to be taken into consideration in such a context. So Annie, I'm curious to hear how you felt yourself as a guest, also connected to what you said before, by the way.
I was just about to say, I felt like part of the community, but there's definitely, you definitely feel that you're a guest because you are a guest. But it did feel like a sense of community. Honestly, with Angelique, who's the head caterer, or I don't know her position, and Cisse, and the community itself, very welcoming and open to you, just like walking into their space, asking questions, and after like maybe the first week or so of being in that space, your identity changes with, like, your relationship changes with them. There's this familiarity. So you could be making work or reading, and you know, a group of people will just come and join you and ask you, what is it you are doing? Like, why are you climbing the roof and hanging the curtain which you use for gardens in your artwork? Like, what does this mean? So I mean, I did feel part of the community in so many senses. And also, whilst I was there, there was other programs going on, like the sports and community engagement that was going on, like the sports. So you participate in that, and it's just like any other space that you exist in, you thrive in. I think it's a space of productivity in terms of the conversations that grow from there, which is what I mentioned earlier about artists or practitioners incorporating languages that do not only allude to maybe their particular material, like painting. So in being in a space like Thread, walking through the markets and paying attention to how a market trader organizes onions on their table will have an effect on the kind of work that you make in the space. Will have an effect on the way you organize your fabric, the kind of weavings that I imagine that maybe Joao will get to like make. There's so many things that you get from being in that space and being in that position for exchange to happen.
That's great. Yeah, it's all about exchange. And I guess to speak about your question earlier, there is a sense of utopia, I guess, an ideal of all of this existing there. I mean, it was kind of something that no one had imagined when Nick Weber got that idea to create this. But it's made together with the people in that region, and it creates something that exists on its own, and it really becomes a whole world in itself. So. Yeah, it's great to hear that it works, and that's what we hear all the time.
Yeah. Joao, do you want to conclude with your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I totally agree with Annie Marie, and I'm very inspired by her work and how residency went as well. And I'm very much looking forward to doing my residency. And I think what really makes me really excited about it is that usually the process is slightly different. I come across communities, or either they approach me or I approach them, and there is already a skill there and we work together. I think this very unique sort of setup with Thread is that I'm going to be going there rather than sort of having a spreadsheet behind and sort of like we're doing ABC, really in an organic way and in an openness, and bringing together the people and myself to really I do have some methodology behind, of course, to back up my practice. But on the other hand, I really want everything to feel very organic and right, and to be something that means a lot to me, but also means a lot to everybody that comes across.
Thank you. And I'm afraid we don't have time for any other questions. We need to wrap it up here. But thank you again, Matthias, Anni Marie, and Joao, for your time and generosity in showing your work and sharing your experiences.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Messages. One of the questions. Yeah, have a lovely day, and thanks again.
Thank you.